postcard I remember.
We'll leave the last few minutes of this discussion, but a quick reminder that you can watch it anytime on our website. Go to cspan.org. Live now to Capitol Hill, where the U.S. Senate out to gavel in for the day. Lawmakers set to resume work on a bill that would extend emergency unemployment benefits that expired back in December. The Senate will recess for their weekly party lunches from 12:30 to 2:15 Eastern. Shortly after they return at about 2:30, a round of votes is scheduled, including one on a Democratic amendment that would extend the benefits through November. A group of Republican senators have offered a similar proposal, but it currently only extends benefits for 3 months rather than the 11 months that Democrats are seeking. And live now to the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order, and the Chaplain Retired Admiral Dr. Barry Black will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal Spirit, today teach our lawmakers to do things your way, embracing your precepts and walking in your path. Remind them that the narrow and difficult road less traveled leads to life, and few find it. As our senators receive guidance from you and follow your leading, replace anxiety with calm, confusion with clarity, and despair with hope. May your peace become the hallmark of their labors as you keep them focused on the priorities that reflect your kingdom. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to count number 266.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 266 S 1846, a bill to delay the implementation of certain provisions of the Biggert Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, we'll have further discussion on this matter today. That is the matter that I move to. On our side, we've cleared the bill. We could complete it quickly. We're waiting to hear from the Republicans. And this is one of the bills that we need to do some amendments on this. We can do some amendments on it. So the point is, I think we should try to get this done. We have been waiting for a long time to get this done. This is truly a bipartisan bill. As I explained to the Republican leader yesterday, I've had a number of Republicans come to me to see if there's a way this bill could be moved quickly. It's become a desperate situation with so many problems. Construction has been, in some areas, brought to a halt. So hopefully we work something out on this in the immediate future. Mr. President, following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, the Senate will resume consideration of the unemployment insurance extension. The time at 12:30 will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans the second 30 minutes. The Senate will then recess from 12:30 to 2:15, as we do every Tuesday for our caucus meetings. At 2:30, there'll be up to 2 roll call votes. First, a cloture vote on the read of Rhode Island substitute amendment. If cloture is not invoked, there'll be a second cloture vote on the underlying bill. Mr. President, we have had some, I think, good discussions, and I'm going to, as I know the Republican leader will, discuss if there's a way to move forward on unemployment insurance. I hope there is. And at 2:30 today, after our caucuses, we'll come out and see if there's an agreement that we can, a consent agreement that we can present to the Senate and move forward with the legislation. Hope that's possible, and we're certainly trying. Mr. President, each day, Bloomberg releases a list of the 300 richest individuals in the world, the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. The list includes 67 fortunate and really fabulously wealthy Americans, more than any other country in the world. We have 67 of the 300. Last year, the members of the Billionaire Index added $524 billion in new wealth to their net worth. Listen to that, Mr. President. Last year, the Billionaires Index, these 67 people, added $524 billion of new wealth. Not million, billion. $2 billion per person last year. And, Mr. President, these 300 fortunate individuals flooded with their already flush coffers with another $2 billion each, while millions of American families struggled to pay their rent. I don't begrudge these people at all that they are making a lot of money. Their good fortune is something that speaks well of our country. We are truly a land of opportunity. But I do believe it's time for average Americans to share in that prosperity, particularly as the economy recovers. Now, Mr. President, if this were just a quirk in the indexes of how rich people are, that would be one thing. But, Mr. President, the last 30 years, this same top 1%, their incomes have increased and their wealth has increased triple, while the middle class has gone down 10% in the same 30 years. It's time for average Americans, because I believe this so sincerely, to share in that prosperity in some way, especially as the economy is now recovering. For most Americans, hard work isn't paying off the way it does for the top 1%. And for many, it's been impossible to even find steady full-time work since the recession began. That's why we must not abandon the 1.4 million Americans who are out there struggling. Unemployed people who have been cut off from these crucial benefits now for the last 2 weeks. And they are looking forward to maybe being cut off forever. This small stipend, averaging $300 a week, has helped them keep food on the tables and literally a roof over their heads while they look for work. I read here on the floor someone from Nevada, a woman, who said she doesn't know where she's going to go, what she's going to do. She, as many people, look for work so very, very hard. You know, part of the unemployment compensation, you have to be fired or laid off at no fault of your own. And then you have to look for work every week. Americans want to go back to work. They don't want to set a bad example for their kids. That they don't want to live off of the system, whatever that means. But there's still only one job for every 3 people searching, all over America. Some places worse than others. A Nevada man wrote to me. He's one of the almost 20,000 Nevadans who lost their unemployment benefits last month. He wrote to me and said he's applied for 700 jobs in the last 10 months. Not 70, not 7, 700. And he's been able to get a dozen interviews. Still can't find work. He hasn't given up hope. He hasn't given up hope of finding a good-paying job, and he hasn't given up hope that Congress will restore emergency unemployment benefits until he does find a job. Neither have the 200 Nevada veterans who attended a job fair last week that I put on. It's held at the University of Nevada over the weekend. It's shameful that tens of thousands of veterans of this nation's armed forces lost their unemployment benefits last year. It's inspiring to hear the stories of hardworking Americans who simply won't give up until they find a job. So I hope senators will remember the perseverance of these brave individuals as they continue to seek a compromise here in this body that would restore emergency unemployment benefits to 1.4 million Americans. Mr. President, this says it all. 67 of the richest people in the world live in America. And they got a $2 billion tip last year. The 1.4 million Americans, they lost $300 on an average per week. That's not fair. This is America, land of opportunity. People who work hard are supposed to be rewarded. Not during the last 30 years. Middle class has lost 10% of their income. And this doesn't take into consideration the poor, Mr. President. The poor, there's more poor than ever in America. The middle class we know is being squeezed out of existence. It's really, the time is for us to take care of these people who are desperate for help. That's what the government's all about. I don't, you know, I feel, and looking back at my own life, government's been good for the people that live in my little town of Searchlight. There are lots of people. It's a town mostly of old people, Mr. President. Many of them get military pensions, they get pensions from where they worked, they get Social Security. But government has done so many good things. Let's not denigrate government. This is a time when people have no opportunities. They need government help. They're desperate. One job. All they want is one job. But they know if there's a vacancy over here, there's going to be scores. We've seen in the news accounts job opportunities. Thousands of people show up sometimes for just a handful of jobs.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
On the unemployment insurance bill, there have been productive conversations between the majority leader and several members on this side. Republicans have offered numerous common sense proposals to get to a conclusion here. Ideally, we'd have spent the past week voting on those proposals, so there's really no good reason for us to be in the position that we're in right now. And let me just underscore some of the things on my side that we'd like to see in the final product. First, the Senate should actually be paying for whatever it passes, and not with spending cuts 11 years from now that we know aren't going to happen. It's also reasonable to expect practical pro-growth job creation measures so we can actually get people back to work. And for a solution to be reasonable, it should also respect the right of our constituents to be heard on this issue through a more open amendment process. We've got to get away from an attitude that essentially says that the views of half the American people don't matter here in the Senate. And these days it's gotten even worse than that. Ideas on both sides are often completely ignored. That's just not how the Senate is supposed to work. And so we've got an opportunity to begin to start fixing the problem on the bill that's before us. It's the right thing to do. I'm hopeful common sense will prevail. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, I've spoken often on the floor about the challenges and opportunities for the future that the people of eastern Kentucky and rural parts of the Commonwealth face. Many of these challenges stem from this administration's regulatory overreach, whether it's the war on coal Obamacare, or Dodd-Frank. Too many people are out of work, which has placed a drastic burden on the coal mining industry and harshly cut the number of jobs available in the coal mining industry and related industries. In spite of the challenges the people of Eastern Kentucky face, I have great confidence that we can overcome them and succeed. I was pleased to be able to assist the Kentucky Highlands Investment Corporation in receiving a Promise Zone designation, which was awarded just last week. That's why I wrote the administration in support of this designation last year. This economic initiative is just one way to help jumpstart the region's journey out of economic distress. But we need more than that. My friend and colleague in the other chamber, Representative Hal Rogers, is leading an effort to identify ways to lift Appalachia out of the cycle of poverty and unemployment through the SOAR initiative, and I applaud his efforts. To offer yet another possibility for Eastern Kentucky, my friend and colleague Senator Rand Paul and I introduced the Economic Freedom Zones Act to further enable Eastern Kentucky to lift the burdens of some of the poorest families in the country. Our legislation would roll back government regulations and tax barriers to spur job creation and reform failed educational systems to aid disadvantaged children. So continuing my efforts to find ways to assist these rural counties and to give these communities a voice, I'm pleased to introduce today, along with Senator Paul, the Helping Expand Lending Practices in Rural Communities Act, or simply the Help Rural Communities Act. My friend and colleague over in the House, Representative Andy Barr, introduced this legislation in that body, and I applaud his efforts to see it pass. The Help Rural Communities Act would give rural counties in Kentucky a voice when the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, has incorrectly labeled them as, quote, non-rural, end quote. Just another example of this administration's one-size-fits-all, we-know-best approach to governing. Several counties in Kentucky, such as Bath County, have been labeled as non-rural and are therefore barred from certain rural lending practices that are helpful to farmers and to small businesses. If you've ever been to these counties, as I have, you would most certainly disagree with the CFPB's ruling. But current law provides literally no opportunity to challenge the CFPB's decision. My bill would allow counties that have been improperly designated as non-rural to petition the CFPB with additional local information to reconsider their status in order to ensure that rural communities, such as those in Eastern Kentucky, have the access to credit that they need to grow their economy. This is an important step in an effort to renew hope for the future in rural Kentucky, especially Eastern Kentucky. Given the bipartisan interest shown in recent weeks to get government out of the way and let people of the region work, Congress and the President can come together to pass this legislation on behalf of Eastern Kentuckians and rural communities. So I look forward to working with my colleagues, Representative Paul and Representatives Barr and Senator Paul, to see that we get this passed. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1845, which the clerk will report. The senator from Vermont. Oh, excuse me, the clerk has to report first.
Calendar number 265, S. 1845, a bill to provide for the extension of certain unemployment benefits and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the time until 12:30 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans controlling the second 30 minutes. Now, the senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, first I should note I'm pleased I am to see the acting president pro tempore. It was a pleasure to share the podium with him today. I would ask unanimous consent upon the completion of my remarks that the chair recognize the senior senator from Illinois, Mr. Durbin.
Without objection.
Mr. President, after many long days and nights of four-party negotiations across a dozen subcommittees over the past month, on Sunday night the Appropriations Committee completed work on the fiscal year 2014 Consolidated Appropriations Act. I want to commend Chairwoman Mikulski, without whom this would not have been possible. It was, above all, her relentless pursuit of this goal and her unmatched ability to rally her subcommittee troops to get us to this point. But also I note that she was helped by some of the most hardworking members of the Senate staff that one can imagine. I'd especially like to commend Tim Reeser of my staff and others who worked with him. I can't keep track of the number of times I was getting calls or emails at midnight or 1 a.m. from Tim on this as we worked through all the difficult parts. But it helped that we had the cooperation of my friend from Alabama, Senator Shelby, the committee's ranking member, who knew how important it was to pass appropriations bills rather than put the government on autopilot. So this means there will be no sequester in fiscal year 2014. There will not be another disastrous government shutdown. You know, this government shutdown is some touted, look what we've done. What you did was you cost the taxpayer some $24 billion and private industry tens of billions of dollars more. But as also as chairman of the Department of State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, I want to thank Senator Lindsey Graham, who brings a level of energy and knowledge to our subcommittee that few could match. And he and I agree an awful lot more than we disagree. I value his support. Let me mention a few things in our bill. For the first, the big picture. For the Department of State and Foreign Operations, the bill provides $49 billion in discretionary budget authority to protect a wide array of United States security, humanitarian, and economic interests around the world. This total is $2.2 billion below the fiscal year 2013 enacted post-sequester level. Now, $6.5 billion is for overseas contingency operations in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, other areas in political transition, including the Middle East and North Africa, and to respond to humanitarian emergencies, particularly in Syria, the Middle East, and Central Africa. If you question why these funds are important, look what's happening today in Syria, and Lebanon, and Jordan, and Turkey, where 2 million Syrians have fled, in South Sudan and the Central African Republic, where hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced because of explosions of ethnic and tribal violence. The bill provides significant increases in funding for refugees and humanitarian programs. It provides funding above the President's request for security at U.S. embassies and other diplomatic facilities. It fully funds our commitments to key allies like Israel and Jordan. It substantially funds our contributions to the United Nations and other international organizations and for UN peacekeeping. And it fully funds the U.S. contribution to the Global AIDS Fund. And many senators care about global health for good reason. HIV, AIDS, other infectious diseases threaten millions of Americans who travel, live, study, serve in the armed forces overseas, as well as here at home. Many of the diseases we work to eradicate are only an airplane trip away from our own shores. And billions of people in the poorest countries, especially children, die or suffer from illnesses that can be easily prevented or treated, that we know that our children or our grandchildren will be immunized from here in the United States, but not available there. We provide a total of $6 billion, the highest amount in history for programs to combat HIV/AIDS, including $1.65 billion for the Global Fund. We have historic levels to combat polio, malaria, tuberculosis, and neglected tropical diseases. Provide $175 million for the Gavi Alliance, which provides life-saving vaccines to children in the poorest countries. For Egypt, which many have been asking about, the bill provides up to the amounts requested for fiscal year 2014, $250 million for economic aid, $1.3 billion for military aid. But, and this seems to have been overlooked by many who have reported about this, so I hope they'll get it correct this time, The military aid is only available to pay current defense contracts, and the proceeds may not be delivered to Egypt unless the Secretary of State certifies there is a national referendum and the government has taken steps to support the democratic transition, and there are democratic elections, and a newly elected government is taking steps to govern democratically. These are the same commitments the government of Egypt made to the Egyptian people, and contrary to some highly inaccurate press reports, there is no waiver if the Egyptian government reneges on these commitments. These are the toughest conditions that Congress has ever imposed on aid to the Egyptian military. I thought I'd try to spell it out for, in case any of the press are listening, so that make sure we can have it correct. We want to see the restoration of democracy, respect for fundamental freedoms in Egypt, including the rights of women, civil society, and religious minorities. If the military continues its repressive tactics, arresting democracy activists, and does not hold free and fair elections, the certification will not be possible, and U.S. aid will be cut off. The bill cuts aid for Afghanistan by 50% from the current level. It has become abundantly clear that as U.S. troops withdraw, the security environment is worsening. The reality, coupled with the refusal of the Karzai government to sign a bilateral security agreement, and the widespread corruption in that government, and the diminishing ability to monitor how U.S. funds are spent, compel a more targeted, sustainable approach. Amounts requested for the Clean Technology Fund, the Strategic Climate Fund. There's some things I wish were not in here, particularly a House provision that would weaken limits on carbon emissions from projects financed by the Export-Import Bank and the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. We should be using public funds to support exports of clean, renewable technology, not to fund projects that worsen global warming. And I'm also very disappointed that a Senate provision to bring the United States into compliance with the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations was rejected and refused by the House of Representatives. By not including this provision, we jeopardize the essential rights of consular assistance for Americans arrested in foreign countries, and we also weaken the credibility we might have as claiming that we're a nation that respects the rule of law. And I point out, the next time some congressman has a person from their state or their district who's arrested overseas, and they say, why weren't they given the ability to speak to our embassy immediately, ask them, well, why did you block our involvement and our compliance with the rules that allow for consular assistance? You know, it puts us in a kind of an awkward position as the United States saying, we want consular assistance if Americans are arrested abroad, but I'm sorry, we can't do that for your country. You know, sometimes there's action which may make somebody feel good in the other body, doesn't really do much to help the United States. So I do appreciate, however, the way the House, particularly Chairwoman Granger and Ranking Member Lau and their staffs worked with me and Senator Graham and others, and I've asked consent my full statement placed in the record because I see my colleague and friend, the distinguished Deputy Majority Leader, who allowed me to go ahead of him, waiting to speak.
Without objection, Deputy Majority Leader.
Mr. President, how much time is remaining?
About 20 minutes.
Mr. President, I ask that I be given 10 minutes, and I believe Senator Schumer is coming to the floor. I ask that he be given the remaining 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, pending before the Congress now is a debate about unemployment benefits. 1.3 million Americans got a notice January 1st that they were not going to receive any more unemployment benefit checks. These are people out of work through no fault of their own who are required under law to be actively pursuing additional employment and regularly reporting to the government. And for that, they receive unemployment benefits of an average of about $300 a week. $300 a week is not a generous amount in this day and age. It's very difficult for any family to get by. They're going to have to dip into their savings to make rent payments, utility payments, put gas in the car to go look for a job, pay for that cell telephone that you need in order to go looking for work. So we are now debating as to whether or not we should extend those unemployment benefits that were cut off on January 1st. I think we should. Historically, we have. Even with lower unemployment rates in the past, we have extended unemployment benefits. Think about this for a second. The average person unemployed in America takes 38 weeks to find a job. However, we're cutting off unemployment benefits at 27 weeks in most places. That means people will have 10 or 11 weeks on average without any support. What happens to a family under those circumstances? Awful things happen. They can't make their rent payments or their mortgage payments or the utility payments or their health payments. And they find themselves literally facing bankruptcy. Losing a job's bad enough. Making it worse by cutting off unemployment checks is unacceptable. So we're debating it. Historically, we have extended these unemployment benefits on an emergency basis, which means we don't pay for them because we understand this is an unusual time in our economy when we need to give a helping hand. We also understand the money that we give to these families is frequently spent immediately. They have to spend it to get by. And as they put money back in the economy, it helps other people go to work. So it's a bit of an accelerant. It's a catalyst for more economic growth. It's good for the overall economy. However, we've run into something new. The Republican side of the aisle has now said, if you want to give unemployment benefits to Americans, you got to pay for them. In other words, you have to cut spending in other areas to pay for them. Listen to what the Republicans have suggested we should do in order to provide unemployment benefits for 1.3 million people who were cut off January 1st. Mitch McConnell, the senior senator from Kentucky, came to the floor, the Republican leader, and suggested last week that the way to pay for the unemployment benefits was to eliminate that section of the Affordable Care Act, which creates a personal responsibility for people to buy their own health insurance and a tax to be paid if they don't, about $95 a person per year. He says eliminate that. Well, the problem with eliminating it, you do raise some revenue, but on the other hand, you cut off the pool of uninsured people who are now buying insurance, and by doing this, you eliminate the protection that we build into the law for every American family that has someone in the household with a pre-existing condition. You can't say to insurance companies and others, cover everyone, even those with pre-existing conditions, unless you expand the pool of people insured. Senator McConnell wants to cut that off. Senator McConnell's proposal would, in fact, eliminate this protection in our bill against discrimination because your child has asthma, your child has diabetes, your wife is a cancer survivor. That's the reality of insurance before this bill. The Republicans believe that eliminating that protection is the way to pay for unemployment benefits. They would penalize 300 million Americans and their families in order to take care of 1.3 million unemployed on a temporary basis. That's a terrible trade-off. Then comes Senator Portman from Ohio. He has a little different approach. He suggests that if you are disabled in America, a judge disabled in America, you should never draw unemployment benefits. Double dipping is what they call it. Wait a minute, you're getting a government check that says you're disabled, and you're getting another government check that says you're unemployed? What's wrong with this picture? Well, I would invite him, and I'm sure the presiding officer, to the sheltered workshops in his state. If you have ever visited a sheltered workshop, here is what you will find. And I found it in Decatur, Illinois. Profoundly retarded and people with serious mental challenges are given a chance to work a little bit. They can make only about $1,000 a month, maximum. What kind of work do they get? Much of it is very simple manual labor. In my state, they make license plates at this facility in Decatur. They came and told me the story about a person who was brought in here who had suffered from serious mental illness his entire life and was non-functional. He just stood there. They brought him in and put him on the line with the license plates. and they showed him a simple task. He blossomed. His life opened. He became a different person. He started accepting more and more responsibilities. It got to the point, they said, when there was a blizzard in Decatur, Illinois, and they closed the sheltered workshop, he wasn't going to miss a day of work. He walked in the snow and stood outside, ready to go to work. Now, the people working in that sheltered workshop were only paid a few dollars an hour. But for him, it was the most important part of his life. While he's being paid, unemployment benefits are building up to protect him if he loses work. The day may come when the sheltered workshop can't find a job for him or closes down. He would then be eligible for unemployment benefits. Senator Portman of Ohio says, no, we should cut off his unemployment benefits to pay for the temporary unemployment benefits of others. I invite Senator Portman to go to a sheltered workshop in his state and to meet these people, and I'll bet he changes his mind on that Republican pay-for. Then comes Senator Ayotte of New Hampshire, and she says, we have a terrible situation with the child tax credit. The child tax credit is available for wage earners who can claim a credit on the taxes they owe and a refundable credit as well in some circumstances for their children. In other words, if you are low income in America, we reduce your tax burden based on the number of children you have. The obvious reason? To give you $1,000 more a year for your child, $20 a week for your child. That, to me, is not an unreasonable thing to do. It alleviates poverty for literally millions of Americans. Senator Ayotte says for those who are filing a so-called I-10, that is those who don't have a Social Security number but work in America and pay taxes as they're required to do, she would cut them off so that they couldn't claim this child tax credit for their children, even if their child is a U.S. citizen. And that's the requirement under the law. So she would cut off child benefits for citizen children to pay for temporary unemployment benefits. You know, we can clean up the child tax credit situation, and I think there are ways to do it in a reasonable fashion. But to cut off millions of children who are legally here in the United States eligible for this child tax credit, is that what we've come to? Cut off a child tax credit? Eliminate the help for those who are working in sheltered workshops, disabled people across America? Eliminate the protection under the Affordable Care Act for discrimination against families with children with pre-existing conditions? Those are the three Republican alternatives to pay for unemployment benefits. Does that define the difference between the parties? I'm afraid it does. It kind of tells you, from our point of view, helping folks who need a helping hand in this country is just part of who we are. There's a compassion gap here when you believe the only way you can help some is by hurting so many others who are struggling to get by in life. And that's all we've heard from the other side of the aisle. I commend those who want to work on a bipartisan basis to solve this. But let's get it done. Let's extend these unemployment benefits. Do it as we did 5 different times without paying for it under previous Republican presidents. Let's do it in a fashion that speaks well of our country. Let's give those folks who are searching for jobs a helping hand so their families can stay together during these winter months, these challenging months, and they can find work, get back to work, pay their taxes, and be right where they want to be, part of the American workforce of the future. Mr. President, I see my colleague on the floor, and I yield the floor to Senator Schumer.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from New York.
First, I'd like to thank my colleague and friend and roommate from Illinois. We are going to miss our landlord deeply for his articulate enunciation of where we're at here. We've always extended unemployment benefits, and we've done it in most instances in a bipartisan way and not paid for. George Bush, 2007, unemployment was only 5.6%. Now it's a little bit, it hovers around 7%. And he moved it forward, and it had bipartisan support. Well, things have evolved. I guess we don't have that bipartisan support. As Senator Durbin outlined, a lot of the amendments to try and pay for this sort of rob Peter to pay Paul. I've heard a lot of my Republican colleagues talk about, let's talk about how we deal with poverty. Well, these measures, these amendments that we've heard talked about are kind of punitive and don't really deal with the issue. But I'd like to address another issue, and that is how we come to agreement here and get this place working again. On both sides of the aisle, there's a great deal of consternation that we're not legislating. We've had this problem for a while, and Thursday it a bit came to a head. There were some harsh words that were issued by some. And the question is, how do we get things working again? Now, first, I would remind my colleagues, there are instances when this place, the Senate in particular, is still working. We had a farm bill, an immigration bill, a WRDA bill. They all had one thing in common, Mr. President, and that is that the chairman and ranking member agreed on a proposal. And when the chair and a ranking member agree on a proposal, or a large group of Democrats and Republicans agree on a bipartisan proposal, in immigration we had great help from the chairman, but Senator McCain and I, neither chairman nor ranking member of Judiciary, came to an agreement with the help of Senators Menendez, Durbin, Bennett, Graham, Flake, and Rubio. But we can get something done, and we can shepherd even the most controversial and difficult pieces of legislation through the floor. But there are many instances, these days more than ever, because the parties are further apart than they used to be, less overlap. There are instances where the chair and ranking member, or there doesn't seem to be a bipartisan agreement. And what do we do in those instances? Well, I've discussed this with many on the other side of the aisle, and there's been a tradition around here. I'm here sort of a middle-level amount of time, about 14 years. And the general theory has been, whichever party is in the majority, whichever is in the minority, that the majority gets to set the agenda and the minority gets to offer amendments. And there's a lot of discussion as to why that is not happening anymore. And there are different explanations on each side of the aisle. And there will be a discussion in our caucus, and I think in the Republican caucus at this lunch, as to how to try to break that logjam. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I would just make one point here that has been largely forgotten, and that is this. There are two parts to this sort of agreement, deal, arrangement. The first part is the ability to offer amendments. Should it be unlimited amendments? Should it be all non-germane amendments? That has to be discussed and worked out. But certainly the minority should get to offer amendments. There's a general theoretical agreement among everybody about that. But the other side is that the majority should be able, once the amendments are disposed of, to get an up or down vote on the final passage of the bill. That the bill not be filibustered. Not just the motion to proceed, but once we go through the amendatory process, the bill itself. Now, if friends on the other side of the aisle say, I want to offer my amendment, but unless it passes, I am going to vote to block the bill from coming up for an up or down vote, that doesn't seem right. So my purpose for a brief few moments in coming to the floor is to remind both sides of the aisle, but particularly my Republican colleagues, that to get this place moving again requires two things. One, an ability to offer amendments. But second, an ability to vote on final passage, up or down vote on final passage, once those amendments are disposed of one way or the other. We know that our colleagues will offer tough amendments sometimes. That's the nature of things. Many times the amendments are just offered with an idea to improve the bill or have a different idea. Sometimes there are amendments that are just make it very difficult to vote against. But so be it. That's how this place has always been run. And I think most of my colleagues on this side of the aisle are willing to accept that. But at the same time, we don't want to go through an amendatory process and then, because we're 55, not 60, never be able to get an up or down vote on final passage of the legislation. So there are two sides to this story. There are two sides to an agreement to get the floor of the Senate working again, particularly when the majority and minority cannot agree on an overall bill. One side, an ability to offer amendments. The other side, an ability for an up or down vote once those amendments are disposed of. And I don't think you can have one without the other. Just as we couldn't ask our Republican colleagues for an up or down vote if they weren't able to offer amendments, I don't think it's fair for our Republican colleagues to ask us to go through the amendatory process, some of which will be difficult, and then not get an up or down vote on final passage. So that's my little piece I'd like to say here, and I hope it'll help bring us together, because the greatest fun I've had in this place and the greatest effectiveness I've had in this place is when I've worked in a bipartisan way on bill after bill after bill. And it happens less frequently now, although, as I say, the immigration bill is an exception to that. Other bills are exceptions to that. But maybe we can get things working back together if each side tries to understand the grievances and the gravamen of the argument of the other. And I'm hopeful we can resolve that both on this bill and on many more bills in the future. Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte.
Well, the Senate day is just getting underway here. Lawmakers today resuming work on a bill that would extend emergency unemployment benefits that expired back on December 28th. The Senate will take their weekly party recess for their weekly party lunches at 12:30 to 2:15. Now, shortly after they get back, at about 2:30, there'll be a round of votes, including one on a Democratic amendment that would extend the benefits through November. So while we wait for further debate, a conversation now.
Mr. President, it's no secret that every Republican in this...
Excuse me, the Senate's in a quorum call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's no secret that every Republican in this chamber, every senator on this side of the aisle voted against the President's health care law. We said it would do great harm to the American people. We're finding out that that's true. It's also no secret that every Democrat in the Senate voted in favor of the health care law. It was partisan, it was a bad idea, and it has failed the country in many ways. People know about the health care website, but the website, of course it was the most spectacular, most public failure, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. Under the iceberg, people are being hit with higher premiums, canceled coverage. Over 5 million people lost their coverage around the country. People aren't able to keep the doctor that they had and liked in spite of the President's promise that if you liked your doctor, you could keep your doctor. There are concerns about higher copays and higher deductibles, but also fraud and identity theft is an issue that is plaguing all of America, and the health care website is really a spot where I believe we're going to see more problems in that area. Americans know that fraud and identity theft are big concerns. It's been clear from the start that the health care exchange was vulnerable to con artists, to hackers, and actually information went out from the government saying be careful with your information because of the concerns of con artists and hackers. So that's a problem, and it's something that I think Washington and this body needs to take seriously. Now, whenever President Obama talks about the health care law, he says if Republicans have good ideas, please bring them forward, share them, and then he says he will support them. Well, Republicans have offered a lot of ideas on how to give the American people the health care reform that they wanted all along. We passed bills in the House of Representatives. We've tried to bring up bills here in the Senate. Democrats won't even allow us to vote on those bills in the Senate. You know, as a doctor, I could tell you what people were looking for with health care reform. They wanted access to quality, affordable health care they need from a doctor that they choose at lower costs. They didn't get that with the health care law that the President and the Democrats shoved down the throats of the American people. And every time the majority leader at that desk blocks reform, I believe he's making things worse for millions of Americans. So we're trying again to take the President at his word and that he will support good Republican ideas. So Senator Johanns of Nebraska and I have introduced a common sense bill that will help protect Americans who use the government insurance exchange. Our bill, called the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, well, it requires the Secretary of Health and Human Services to notify Americans within 2 business days if their personal information has been stolen due to security breaches on the exchanges. Not saying it's going to happen, but it sure could happen, and if it does, people need to be informed. Now, the House passed a version of this bill just last Friday, and they did it. It was clearly a bipartisan bill. 67 Democrats joined Republicans to support this good idea. Now I believe it's our turn here in the Senate. You know, there shouldn't be anything controversial about this at all. This should be the kind of a bill that we can just pass by unanimous consent. But after forcing so many Americans to buy insurance through this program, I believe it's the government's responsibility to safeguard Americans' private information. You know, even senators who voted for the President's health care law should agree with this. That should be the minimum that we require from Washington. Keep Americans' private information private. Then, if government fails to keep that information safe, it should have to admit it and tell people what happened. That's all this bill says. It's a single page. Americans are concerned about their safety online, about having their identity stolen, and this bill would give people at least the reassurance that they would be informed that if there are issues of their identity theft, that they would know about it. Well, look at what just happened to the Target stores. It now looks like 70 million people have their personal data compromised. Now, Target ran a full-page ad, took out in the Washington Post, talking about what happened with their 70 million customers. They apologized for it. The same ad that ran here in the Washington Post ran in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, other papers around the country. Target told people about the security breach so they can take appropriate steps and watch for signs of identity theft. I think Target's also said they do free credit ratings for a year, made a number of concerns that the American people have, addressed those concerns and said this is how we would take care of it. All the bill that we are offering today says, Mr. President, is that something happens like it happened here, and it happens on the government's health exchange website, that Washington should do the same thing. Should tell people that someone has gotten access to their personal information so people can protect themselves. The health care law was completely inadequate in how it dealt with personal security issues. The website's been a debacle. We know that. It's a hacker's dream. But even before the website was launched last March, it has been a mess. CBS News reported that deadlines for the site's final security plans were delayed 3 times over the summer, so we saw that problem. Final end-to-end security tests were never finished before the website was launched. In November, after the website was launched, 4 experts testified before the House about website problems. They were asked, would any of you advise an American citizen to use this website as the security systems now exist? Not one of them, not one of the 4 said that they would. None. Well, by December, one of those same industry experts said that the situation was even worse. The so-called fixes caused new security patterns and problems. Remember, that's after the White House was claiming that it had fixed the website. What they had fixed was just the tip of the iceberg, and these problems under the tip continue today. So the House passed a bill on Friday, overwhelming bipartisan majority. The President still says he opposes it. Why would the President oppose this bill? Why would he oppose being honest with the American people and helping them protect themselves from identity theft? President Obama has dug in his heels so deep on his health care law that he won't even consider good bipartisan ideas that will help the American people. Senator Johans and I are going to continue to push for a vote and to call on the President to support this bill. The President needs to keep his promise to support good Republican ideas and to protect the American people from identity theft. As I say, Mr. President, this is just the tip of the iceberg with the website. All you have to do is to go to this morning's newspapers, whether it's the Washington Post, above the fold, front page, insurance sign-ups by young adults lag, key measure for health care law. Premiums could jump if more don't enroll. Higher premiums, that's what I'm hearing about from home in Wyoming. Today's Wall Street Journal, health sign-ups skew older, raising fears of higher costs. That's not what the President promised. The President came to the floor of the House of Representatives joint session of Congress, said if you like your coverage, you can keep your coverage. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Said insurance premiums would drop for people. He made statements that over the past years that under his plan, insurance policies would drop $2,500 per family. Well, then why is the New York Times saying premiums could jump? The President says one thing, the rest of the world sees another. And then the New York Times today, again, front page above the fold, older people lead sign-ups for insurance. Pattern could result in higher premiums. Questions about the law's financial viability. Put together a program that those of us who actually read the bill ahead of time had great concerns about its success, its viability, its ability to deliver what it promised. The President's promises, one of which has now been called the lie of the year, continue, and we call that by a group that looks at statements and is somewhat of a referee as political statements are made. To get that kind of an accomplishment for the President just shows how misleading the efforts have been on the American people. The American people see what they're getting in their mail, cancellation notices, They see what happens when they go to the website, higher premiums, sticker shock, and now this threat of ongoing security concerns, especially in light of what's happening elsewhere around the country. I think it's time for the President to actually keep his word that he does want to work with Republicans for good ideas, and he could do so by adopting this measure passed by the House on Friday that Senator Joe Hans and I have presented to the Senate for their approval today. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arizona.
I rise today to congratulate my colleagues on the recent introduction of legislation to renew trade promotion authority. Increasing free trade levels a playing field for U.S. companies. We all know